Since the beginning, Sid Meier's Civilization has been a staple of the 4X strategy genre. Today, we will look into its history and discuss the impact it has left on the gaming industry. 4X is a slightly uncommon genre in modern gaming and is defined as a game in which players control an empire and are expected to explore, expand, exploit, and exterminate. The term was first coined by Alan Emmerich in his preview of his strategy game Master of Orion. 4X games did not see as much popularity as they do today, not until the first Sid Meier's Civilization popularized the genre. Its development began in 1990 when Sid Meier and his colleague Bruce Shelley were discussing their interest for the turn-based wargame Empire. Meier had challenged Shelley to give him 10 things he would change about Empire. Instead, Shelley provided him with 12, and in May 1990, Meier presented him with a floppy disk containing the first prototype of Civilization based off these changes. The prototype took elements from Empire, SimCity, the Civilization board game, as well as Sid Meier and Shelley's previous game, Railroad Tycoon. Meier and Shelley went back and forth, with Shelley providing suggestions and criticism based on his playthroughs of the game, while Meier coded and reworked the game in order to address them. A year later, in 1991, the game was released by the game studio Microprose, who until then had been focused on making flight simulators. It followed a naming tradition the studio had started with the games that strayed from their usual genre and harbored Sid Meier's name in order to attract players to something they would find familiar if they had played previous Microprose games. Sid Meier's Civilization contained 3 major features: global conquest, akin to the board game Risk, city management, akin to the Empire game, and a new way of representing the upgrade hierarchy called the technology tree, similar to the board game that shared the Civilization name. In the game, the player takes the role of a civilization leader and competed with a number of other civilizations as they build their empire from the Bronze Age in 4000 BC to the Space Age in 2100 AD, along with a fair amount of micromanagement where the player had to deal with their cities and resources. They were also tasked with exploration, diplomacy, and warfare. Players were required to manage the technology tree and decide which advances to make, while fending off barbarians that may harass their cities while simultaneously competing with other civilizations. Players can also create wonders, which were special buildings that could only be built once per world, providing unique benefits to the civilization that built it. Sid Meier's Civilization was very successful. First released on MS-DOS, it received a multitude of ports, including but not limited to Windows, Macintosh, the SNES, Sega Saturn, and even the PlayStation. It is considered one of the most influential games of all time by news websites such as GameSpot and IGN. It has received awards such as the Origins Award in the category Best Military or Strategy Computer Game in 1991. In total, Sid Meier's Civilization sold 1.5 million copies. Despite this success, Microprose's co-founder Bill Steely wished for the company's main focus to be flight simulators and did not allow Meier to develop a sequel right away. This led to Meier developing a game in collaboration with the new employee Brian Reynolds called Sid Meier's Colonization in 1994, a Civilization-like game that covered the age of colonization. This collaboration led to Reynolds becoming a lead designer in the real Civilization sequel, Sid Meier's Civilization 2, that was released in 1996 on the PC. with Meier taking more of a backseat and offering advice and guidance through the development process. Civilization 2 kept much of the original gameplay, offering upgrades to graphical fidelity, AI, as well as tweaks to various units, world wonders, special tiles, and technologies. It was with this iteration that came the concept of the High Council, firepower, and unit hit points, as well as several new units, like the stealth aircraft that have been part of the franchise ever since. Much like its predecessor, Civilization 2 received critical acclaim with a 94% score on Metacritic. Reviewers praised it for its balance, deeming it a worthy sequel to the first Civilization, with PC Gamer suggesting that this entry cemented the franchise's place in video game history. In total, Sid Meier's Civilization 2 sold 3 million copies worldwide. Despite Civilization's success, Microprose was struggling financially and eventually fell into debt. This led co-founder Steely to sell the company prior to Civilization 2's release. It was when Microprose's new owner Spectrum Holobyte decided to merge with it in 1996, cut a lot of Microprose's current staff. This caused Civilization developers Sid Meier, Jeff Briggs, and Brian Reynolds to leave the company to form a new one called Firaxis. Without the rights to Civilization, which was still owned by Microprose at the time, the studio released Sid Meier's Alpha Centauri in 1999 as a spiritual sequel to Civilization. The game was set in a science fiction representation of the 22nd century, with the story continuing from the end of the Civilization franchise's space age era. The game received critical success, with a 92% Metacritic score. The video game magazine Next Generation gave 5 out of 5 stars, stating, "Sid Meier creates yet another masterpiece in this game that, at a glance, looks all too familiar." Unfortunately, this success was not reflected in its sales numbers, as the game sold just 280,000 copies in the United States, which was less than any of the other games in the Civilization franchise. It would take several years before the publishing rights of the Civilization series were made available to Firaxis by Infogrames, the new owner of Microprose, who was willing to become the publisher of the game for Firaxis. In 2001 came the release of Civilization 3 on the PC, but unlike its predecessors, it was not designed by Sid Meier. Instead, it was developed by Jeff Briggs and Soren Johnson. The game brought a lot of changes to the formula, such as the addition of the cultural and diplomatic victory, as well as special traits and units given to each nation. These changes worked to deepen the gameplay and gave players incentives to play different civilizations depending on the type of victory that they were aiming for, and this mechanic would be carried over to the next iterations of the franchise. Although the game had a couple of initial bugs, they were quickly patched, and it did not stop the game from receiving critical acclaim. Computer Game Magazine commented that it was the best Civilization yet, and that's saying something. The rights of the Civilization franchise passed hands once again when Infogrames sold them in 2004 for $22 million to Take-Two, an American video game holding company. Their subsidiary, 2K Games, would then become the publishers of Firaxis for the Civilization series. While developing Civilization 4, Meier created his own personal rule for future sequels. He called it the 33 rule, which meant that a sequel should be 33% established systems, 33% improved ones, and 33% new content. This was meant to guarantee that returning players could enjoy the title while also attracting a new player base. With this new mindset, Civilization 4 was released in 2005 for the PC, designed by Soren Johnson and directed by Sid Meier. It received 2 expansions, Warlords in 2006 and Beyond the Sword in 2007. The game made the notable addition of the religion system, which factored into numerous pre-existing game mechanics. It impacted diplomatic relationships between civilizations, the spread of culture, offered various gameplay bonuses, and could even be used to aid in diplomatic victory. Civilization 4 also saw the beginning of concepts such as the inability to let units cross another civilization's border unless they had a border treaty or were at war. A new civics model, the ability for barbarians to build their own cities, as well as great people, special units that offered unique abilities. Civilization 4 was also much more open to modifications compared to its predecessors, allowing for a passionate modding community that has been creating mods for every Civilization game ever since. The game was a commercial success, selling more than 1 million units by mid-March of 2006. At that time, it also held a top 10 position on every weekly computer game sales chart released by the NPD Group since the game's launch. It received critical acclaim with a 94% score on Metacritic. Civilization 4 was praised not only for its improvement in the turn-based strategy game genre, but also for how advanced the 3D graphics were for its time, which allowed for better immersion and visibility thanks to the developers building the game engine from scratch just for the game. IGN also noted that the game's AI was much more intelligent than in Civilization 3, which designer Soren Johnson stated was thanks to their secret pre-beta group testing the game before release. Shortly after Civilization 4's release, in November 2005, Take-Two bought Firaxis for $27 million, making it the owner of both the developing and publisher rights of the franchise. This acquisition led to the release of Sid Meier's Civilization 5 in 2010. Although Sid Meier's name was kept in the title, Meier's role as director was filled by John Schaefer, who also took the role of designer in combination with Ed Beach and Scott Lewis. The game received several small DLC add-ons that added new civilizations and scenarios to play through, as well as 2 expansion packs, Gods and Kings and Brave New World. With all the DLCs included, Civilization 5 brought the total number of playable civilizations up to 43, which is the largest number of civilizations that has ever been available in any Civilization game. It was also the first incarnation of the series where leaders spoke in their native languages in a fully animated diplomatic scene. Another addition was the concept of city-states, small countries limited to a single city, who did not compete to win the game. They provided economic and diplomatic bonuses to the players who befriended or allied with them through numerous quests and demands, and would help them wage wars against other players if needed. One of the expansion packs, Brave New World, also saw a complete overhaul of the cultural victory. Instead of amassing enough points to fill out 5 of the civics trees in the original to a new cultural domination by influencing other civilizations' culture through tourism. The emphasis on new features meant that the development team had to trim some of the systems present in previous iterations of the game to some fans' disarray. The change to some core systems of the game also meant the team had to create an entirely new AI system, which earned some criticism. Notably, OneUp.com said that Civilization 5 featured an AI that can't play the game, while Eurogamer called it curiously terrible. Even the game's lead designer, John Schafer, criticized the game's shortcomings, writing that the AI opponents were completely enslaved to their gameplay situation and thus appeared random. Nevertheless, the game received just as much critical acclaim as its predecessor, with a 90% Metacritic score. It sold more than any other game in the franchise, reaching 8 million units and placing it 12th in the list of best-selling PC games of all time. The latest game in the Civilization franchise is Sid Meier's Civilization 6, released in 2016. It was also published by 2K Games, with Ed Beach working as lead designer. It received 2 expansion packs, Rise and Fall in 2018 and Gathering Storm in 2019. The game had a new engine that supported day and night cycles, as well as a complete overhaul of its graphics, giving the leaders a more cel-shaded cartoon art style. Instead of occupying a single tile, cities now expanded into districts that occupied the surrounding tiles. Wonders were similarly constructed on tiles rather than being confined to the city itself. This made player cities more strategic, since one had to be careful where districts were built in order to gain the best bonuses while not losing any important tile improvement or resource. The civics tree was also completely reworked to progress in a similar manner to the technology tree, needing culture in order to progress. There were several other tweaks, such as the changes brought to workers who now had a limited amount of uses, the addition of governments, as well as tweaks made to the AI who now had specific agendas that changed the way they played and interacted with the players. Civilization 6 received generally favorable reviews according to Metacritic, giving it a 88% score. GameSpot praised it for the game's nuanced addition and its unstacking of cities, which added a new strategic layer that fills the gap and creates greater variety in the type of thinking Civilization demands. Others like Destructoid criticized Civilization 6, saying that its new religious victory was a nuisance, recommending to turn it off. It also lamented the lack of scenarios, the scrapping of the diplomatic victory condition, as well as the lack of Steam Workshop support at launch. Despite this, the game sold more than 1 million units in the first 2 weeks of its release, making it the fastest-selling Civilization game in the series and is on track to become the best-selling Civilization game in the franchise. Sid Meier's Civilization is a strange contrast of many financial adversities with continued success and quality. Although not the first game to have 4X elements, the Civilization series is considered to have introduced the defining elements of this genre, in particular, the complexity of interlocking gameplay systems introduced in the first Civilization game. Its influence has been profound and is not only one of the best regarded strategy games, but also one of the best video game series of all time, aggregating high reviews for every single one of its mainline installments. We would like to believe that it's something all game studios should attempt to strive towards, to focus on quality rather than quantity. By adopting this ethos, perhaps more franchises would be given that one extra turn so desperately needed.